Vă mulțumim frumos că ați venit astăzi aici și mă gândeam că avem numai vești bune astăzi și cred că era nevoie de așa ceva. Prima mare veste bună este, se spune tot timpul că e multă oportunitate în criză, corect? Orice criză e oportunitate. Ei bine, cred că n-am avut niciodată așa de multe oportunități în viața noastră de până acum. Și bănuiesc că este o chestie de care ne bucurăm toți. Lăsând gluma la o parte, avem de-a face cu lucruri cu care ne-am mai confruntat până acum. Lucruri care, într-un fel și pe bănci, le face să se remarce, dacă vreți, le dă șansa să se remarce, pentru că o bancă, în principiu, ar trebui să fie de folos în gestionarea incertitudinii de către clienții pe care îi are. Cu cât mai mare incertitudinea, și asta trăim astăzi, cu atât cred că și pretențiile față de serviciul bancar și față de ce poate să facă o bancă pentru clienți sunt pe măsură, cresc pe măsură. Pentru a vedea împreună cam ce se întâmplă, că avem masa plină astăzi, avem schimbări geopolitice, avem în sfârșit AI-ul dincolo de, cum spunea chiar invitatul nostru de astăzi, Andrew Bester, care se transformă dintr-o speranță și dintr-un hype, da? în ceva care chiar are impact. Avem un război comercial, avem un război real, avem o Europa care se reinventează, avem o Germanie care tocmai pivotează dramatic în altă direcție după 80 de ani, avem turbulențe politice peste tot, avem o scenă animată chiar și în România, după cum vedem, ba chiar foarte vizibilă la nivel mondial, lucru cu care nu suntem de obicei obișnuiți. Astăzi avem alături de noi, în primul rând, un panel pe macroeconomie. Îl voi invita imediat după introducere pe Valentin Tataru, our Chief Economist în România, alături de Carsten Brzeski, care este șeful global pe analiză macroeconomică la ING, pentru a discuta ce se întâmplă în România și în Europa, inclusiv Germania, din perspectivă macroeconomică. Și pe urmă vom avea un panel să discutăm un pic ce înseamnă toate provocările astea strategice concret pentru economia României, pentru bankingul din România, pentru viitoarele politici economice din România, unde voi invita alături de mine pe scenă pe Andrew Bester, Head of Wholesale Banking și membru al Management Board Banking al ING Group, pe Florian Neagu, care este directorul Direcției de Stabilitate Financiară din Banca Națională României, și pe Daniel Angel, Country Managing Partner de la PricewaterhouseCoopers și președinte al Consiliului Investitorilor Străini. Cu alte cuvinte, putem acoperi întregul eșichier și să facem un fel de secțiune verticală prin cine decide și cine execută strategie economică și financiară în România. Îl invit pentru început pe Valentin să discutăm macroeconomie.
Bună dimineața, and we'll switch to English for this section, given that our guest, Carsten, is not yet so familiar with Romanian. So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this macroeconomic discussion. I hope the morning coffee kicked in. At least I know for some of you it did, because you already gave me a hard time with some political question. Yeah, that reminded me actually something about being an economist, because many times, most of the times, people love to hear what we need to say, or we have to say, but if we get it right, some people are happy, some are not, and if we get it wrong, some people are happy, some are not. That brings me to our guest today, Carsten, our global chief economist. Good morning, Carsten. Are you with us?
Good morning, Valentin. I'm with you, yes, and thanks for inviting me.
Always happy to have you with us. So, Carsten's insights are always very appreciated, and not just because he's very thoughtful, but also because, quite annoyingly, he tends to be right most of the time, which for the rest of us is sometimes a bit exhausting. Today I'll be focusing on Romanian economy, and then Carsten will give us the bigger picture and see how we can connect the dots globally. So first on the economy, on the Romanian economy, I'll be saying just a few words before handing over to Carsten. I guess the main observation, the bigger picture observation that I can make right now is that we seem to be shifting towards a lower growth regime in the post-COVID world. So for Romania, historically speaking, we've had more or less we can identify three time periods. One is before 2008, when it was very easy for Romania to print above 5% growth or even more than that. Post 2008 and before COVID, we shifted towards a 3 to 4% growth, closer to 4. And now in the post-COVID world, it seems we are heading more towards a 2-ish% growth, 2 to 3%. And I would highlight two, maybe three reasons for that. And one is external. It's the Eurozone economy, and especially Germany. And here Carsten will help us to explain why Germans love to spend or to live within their means and not overspend like the rest of us, at least until yesterday. Let's see what a difference they makes. The second reason is maybe a bit counterintuitive for a rapidly catching up economy, but there is an element of saturation. Statistics show that the GDP per capita in Romania has reached 80% of the EU average. This puts us ahead of countries like Hungary, like Poland, amazingly, pretty much ahead of all CEE countries except maybe Czech Republic, Slovenia, this kind. So it is an element of saturation as we reach or we get closer and closer to the EU average. It is normal for growth to subside somewhat. And the third reason, on which I will expand a little bit, is the fiscal problem, the budget deficit in Romania, which again might be a bit counterintuitive because normally deficits stimulate the economy. But in the case of Romania, it doesn't work that way anymore. Why? Because the deficits have been large year after year, consistently large. So the fiscal impulse, the fiscal the marginal help that we get from the fiscal side doesn't matter as much for growth anymore, but it matters more and more for rating agencies, it matters more and more for the European Commission and for businesses. And here's the point I wanted to make actually, because for over a year now, we've been going through this increased uncertainty on the local market about what will happen with the fiscal code after elections. Yeah, so everyone started to expect tax hikes. We didn't know exactly how this will look like. We are still in this situation yet, so we don't have a much clearer picture now. And uncertainty itself acts like a tax on the economy. I'm trying to float this idea around for a while now, because what do you do if you don't know what your profit tax will be next year, or your income tax, or various subsidies? Of course, you're going to be prudent, maybe optimize some investments, maybe trim some costs, reduce some discretionary spending for the consumers, and so on. And this creates essentially the effect of a tax on the economy, this uncertainty, without the benefits, without the revenues that the tax generates. So these were the three big, let's say, points I wanted to make so far, and I'll hand over to Carsten to help us connect the dots globally. I'll come back to the Romanian economy depending how the discussion goes. So Carsten, over the last 2 months or so, it feels like a wrecking ball has been smashing through the world economy, challenging the world as we know it, at least the post-World War II global order as we know it. How do you see this unfolding, and what can Europe do about it?
Very, very easy questions, Valentin. Thanks for that. My apologies first. I see on screen that I look like this stereotype German who's done too much sunbathing. But the reason is in my hotel room there is a red wall behind my camera. So sorry for that. I'm normally much paler than what you see on the screen right now. So on Trump and the US, let's try to make sense of it. And Valentin knows that you all know that it feels already as if this were a couple of years, and not as if we're only we're not even 2 months down to Trump's second term in office. So we're just end of March. If I try to make sense of what is happening in the US. And some people in Europe always argue, well, you can't make sense of it. Well, yes, you can. I can only recommend to all of you who haven't so far, please check out Project 2025. That is a big project by many conservative think tanks in the US, already set up in 2023, which provides you with actually a playbook of what this Trump administration was and is going to do. You can even, and that's also the frightening part of digitalization. If you have too much time there during the breakfast to check on your phone something like the DOGE tracker or the Project 2025 tracker. So there is more or less in real time the progress that the current US administration has booked on deregulation, on overhauling what they call the deep state, et cetera, et cetera. But if we then focus on economics, and where does this Trump administration start from? It starts from this idea of really making the US economy great again. And from a US point of view, it makes sense. So what is the plan to do? The plan is to do deregulation. That is Elon Musk also being a wrecking ball, the DOGE initiative, but deregulation should also bring in more economic power, more economic momentum to the economy. That is one thing. Then there is drill, baby, drill. The idea of lowering energy costs by increasing energy production is not going to work, but the idea behind it clearly makes sense. So again, bring down energy prices, not only to make the US economy more attractive, but also to lower cost of living for Americans. Then the next thing is tax cuts. We haven't seen these tax cuts yet, but the idea is to come with tax cuts, both for households and corporates, would also increase the attractiveness of the US economy. And for the fourth point is tariffs. And of course, we have been talking about tariffs since Inauguration Day, but the idea, in my view, behind tariffs is these days threefold. Point one is tariffs, or the revenue of tariffs, are needed in order to finance tax cuts. That's an important one. The second one is the Trump administration apparently wants to use tariffs in order to create a kind of third version of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, making a North American trade union following the European example. So without tariffs between Canada, Mexico, and the US, but with common external tariffs to the rest of the world. And the third point to use tariffs, in theory, is that you force companies to reconsider stopping exports to the US, but moving to the US. So if you look at this concept, I think it can, at least in a theoretical world, it can make sense. So increasing the attractiveness of the US economy, using a stick to beat other countries, and to make and to convince companies to rather do business in the US. So the only problem is if you communicate this in a very chaotic way with lots of back and forth, you create uncertainty. And that is what we're currently seeing. Plus, he's only using the stick and he's not offering the carrot so far. So we haven't seen anything regarding tax cuts. So right now, this is only tariffs, which creates a lot of uncertainty. And we also know who's paying the price for higher tariffs. It is always the domestic consumer. And that is something that they're currently seeing in the US. And Valentin knows that. Don't ask us now, what is your forecast for the next couple of weeks, quarters? We don't know. I think the level of uncertainty has never been higher than currently. The range of plausible potential outcomes for the global economy has never been wider than currently. And I'll just give you two examples. Yeah? So in this scenario I just described would be one in which the US economy would benefit tremendously from these economic policies. It's clearly not what financial markets are trading currently. Financial markets are rather talking about Trump session, Trump slump, so a slowdown of the US economy. But in the longer run, it is still a policy that could eventually work. So don't rule this out for the US economy. It would clearly harm Europe and other economies because it is kind of cannibalizing growth from abroad in order to see stronger growth in the US. That is one thing. And then, of course, you have a more negative scenario in which it creates so much uncertainty, so much turbulences that not only the US economy is falling into recession, but also the uncertainty that what Valentin mentioned regarding Romania. Of course, uncertainty is the poison for every economy because it simply means that also in the rest of the world, corporates will hold back their investment decisions. Households will hold back their consumption decisions. So, and I think in a worst case scenario, we would end up really in a stagnating global economy. Well, final point, I'll hand back over to Valentin because I think we want to move to Europe. And for us in Europe, of course, I think the US is extremely interesting, extremely fascinating what's currently happening there. But in Europe, we should stop just following every comment on social media, just be extremely excited about it, but not doing anything about it. And I think that is also the change, not over the last 2 months, Valentin, that we saw, but maybe over the last 2 to 3 weeks. We've seen a important seismic change in how Europe is actually dealing with these issues. And there are two things. One, Europeans' response now when it comes to security. So increasing defense spending, and the other one, but I guess we're going to talk about that in a second, is clearly the German U-turn. So all of a sudden, we have given up being the beacon of fiscal stability, but we now try to lead by example in Europe by spending like hell.
Yeah, so let's address this point actually, because we cannot let it get away. What happened yesterday with the vote in the German parliament, is it as important as it feels like, as it's been reported, or you think in the end will somehow muddle through again in the European style, or actually this is quite a change that we've been witnessing?
The vote, the decision is historic. If you just look back, Germany had always been, prone to public finance solidity. Then, during the financial crisis, they came up with their domestic fiscal debt brake, more or less running balanced budgets. The idea back then was in order to tie politicians' hands, not to be irresponsible with taxpayers' money. Makes complete sense. During the Euro crisis, early 2010s, Germany also kind of really tried to lead by example, thinking that, well, we cannot ask Greece, Spain, Portugal, Ireland to do fiscal austerity if we are not leading by example. Also domestically, in domestic politics, this schwarze Null, black zero, played an important role during the 16 years of Angela Merkel in office, because it was actually the only economic promise that she made and could always stick to, and that people, kind of recognized. Well, running a surplus, reducing debt, that clearly was something that really attracted also voters' attention. So the vote we had yesterday is therefore really historic. It is not only 500 billion euro for infrastructure spending. It is also a change now to this constitutional fiscal debt brake, allowing more or less for unlimited spending on defense. And it is also giving the regional governments in Germany, federal structure, more spending power. So how much money will come out of this? It is 500 billion plus X. We don't know how large the X will be. It will be large. So why is this historic now? Because it is not only meaning that, Germany is opening its wallet and it's just spending money everywhere. Because the idea behind it, there is always room for failure. But the idea behind it is really to be very targeted with government spending. And that would make sense. So if this is now really going into infrastructure, most of you know that the German infrastructure, once upon a time, being extremely great and modern in Europe, but has been deteriorating over the last 15 years. So if this now would really be revamping infrastructure in Germany, and that is highways, that is railways, but that is also digitalization, that is also hospitals, that is also education. So it would clearly modernize the infrastructure. Will this also mean that the German economy would already become more competitive? No, it won't, because even for that, more is needed. To see Germany really thriving again, the incoming government really needs to make its own homework right now. So now they decided on spending money. That is good, and that is really needed, if it's done in a very tailored way. But the other thing that they still need to decide on is structural reforms. How to create more innovation, how also to free more business dynamics in the country, how to reduce bureaucracy. More or less, in one sentence, how do you ensure that the German economy is not only driving on automotive over the next 10 years, but that there will be new sources of industrial and economic growth in Germany. And that alone will not be achieved by spending money like hell. It also requires structural reforms.
Yeah, so I guess I would sum up by saying that pumping money into infrastructure does not necessarily bring innovation and improves competitiveness automatically. I'm sure there will be a few questions in the audience about the Green Deal. So how do you think Europe will adjust its Green Deal policy in the light of these developments with Trump, but not only?
I think we now have the clean energy deal, so it's no longer called. Well, we still have the Green Deal, and we've now the changes here. I think what we're seeing, and whether we like it or not, but we see a shift in Europe that goes more towards implementation of former ideas plus adaptation to climate change. So we've seen, I think, also with the weaker growth environment, in industrial problems, not only in Germany, but above all in Germany, there is a shift going on in European politics saying, okay, we will not give up on the Green Deal, on green targets, but we also need to have a closer eye on our economies. So therefore, I think what we will be seeing here is that there will be more room, and that Germany will be an example, because a detail, but not so much of a detail, is part of this political deal that we got, that was voted yesterday, is to include the climate targets into the German constitution. And that is because of the political trading with the Greens. So this still means Germany, and I think also Europe will follow, will not give up on climate targets, and there will be, I think, more spending power to subsidize, for example, the transition. The only question I think that Europe has still not answered is what is the end game? And what I'm still missing is a clear plan for all of Europe to what kind of investments and how large are these investments needed to make us fully climate or CO carbon neutral. What is really needed to get over the next 10, 20 years to be fully renewable? And then have a plan, have a number of how much this would really cost, and then really have an open debate on who's going to pay the price for that. Will it be burdened or carried by governments? Will it be via higher taxes for corporates and households? I think that is still unclear. But as you also mentioned, Valentin, on what's going on in the US, I think we've seen this change away from where implementing the Green Deal, reaching carbon neutrality is no longer laid upon us by governments, but where it is now also up to citizens, to corporates to continue. And I think that is what we're seeing in the US. So in my view, it doesn't mean that this is a clear no to ESG or to climate transition, but it is no longer kind of really forced by governments, and which leaves more responsibility for corporates, for households, but also for us as a bank.
Yeah, so time is running out fast. We have 8 more minutes. Still a few hot topics we want to touch, especially about Ukraine and the defense spending in general. But you mentioned the lack of a plan, of a clear plan, and I would pick on this idea to again make the transition towards Romania. And I was mentioning the uncertainty that we've been going through last year, and to some extent we still are. Essentially, we do expect a fiscal reform to be adopted very quickly after the May elections. And here I would like to emphasize that fiscal reform does not necessarily mean, or does not only mean, higher taxes. So at least for Romania, we're talking about much more than this. We're talking about introducing differentiated taxation for property, for example, to tax them at market value. We're talking about introducing risk analysis modules at the level of the tax authority. We're talking about reducing cash payments in the economy, talking about selective spending cuts in the public sector. So there are many, many more items involved in a fiscal reform than just increasing taxes. Yeah, that could happen. VAT could be increased. By the way, I don't think it will. I think this will be a solution of last resort, increasing the VAT. But increasing the VAT rate is not a fiscal reform in itself. Better collecting VAT, reducing the VAT gap is a fiscal reform, or it's a result of a fiscal reform. Expanding the taxable base is a result of a fiscal reform. So I would emphasize this point that after elections, while we do expect some taxes to be increased, this is not the main point of the fiscal reform that will be adopted. The idea is simply to make the whole system, the whole fiscal system, fairer, and essentially to expand the taxable base. So now I would make the transition again to Carsten to speak about the defense spending, Carsten, because I still have some issues understanding how this will play out in reality. We have countries like Poland spending almost 5% of GDP already, and countries like Hungary spending 1 point something. How do you see this unfolding, and what could it mean for our part of the world, especially the CE?
Yeah. Well, of course, the official European view, that is the EU on average will now increase its defense spending. Like I said, there are big differences across European countries on average. The EU spends 2% of GDP currently on defense, and I think there is now at least the intention to do more. Given my last name and my origin, I would clearly hope that Europe is really making this come true. The risk with Europe is always, and we know that, to overpromise and to underdeliver. Or in other words, complacency. So big political announcements today do not necessarily really last for a couple of years. I think that is something we need to keep in mind. So officially now, Commission will allow the member states to run higher deficits in order to cater for more defense spending. There is also this 150 billion euro loan facility that could also help then European countries to spend more. But now comes the big but. What I would expect, and that is, Andrew, this is not yet an official ING view put in any research paper, but I think what could happen is that over, let's say, the next 2 years, so Germany clearly will increase defense spending, no question about it. But will really all European countries go to defense spending of 3 or 4% of GDP? I have my doubts. I think that there will be a risk, political risk, that of free riding, that namely the further you are away from Ukraine, or the further your capital is away from Ukraine, the lower the likelihood will be that a country will sustainably or continuously spend high amounts of money on defense. So if I was a government in Madrid, for example, and I see all of a sudden Germany now increasing defense spending, I know the Polish numbers, I know some CE numbers, I think, well, gosh, it's going to take a while before the Russian army will be in Madrid, so we should also be fine spending much less. I think that is clearly the risk in this idea of every European country will do more. Would this necessarily be a problem? No. If the large member states, Germany, France, and also no longer a EU member state, but the UK, will clearly work on a European defense policy and will clearly increase defense spending, that would also help our security. Don't ask me really how the Ukraine conflict, the war in Ukraine will end, Valentin, as this clearly has big implications for not only for CE, but for all of Europe. If I stick to this defense spending story, so assume Germany will do more, large European economies will do more, but not every single European member state will do similar or equal amounts. I think that is one thing. Would it, and I think also another point, would spending more on defense now really be this trigger for an industrial transition that could also have an impact on CE? Because I always get this question: well, will military equipment production be the new automotive sector in Germany? And I can only answer, it might be, but not over the next couple of years. So military equipment production will be a slow burner. And just to throw in some numbers here, and then I think time is up. So of the 2% of GDP that the European countries have spent on defense since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is really 80% went abroad. Meaning this is Europe buying military equipment elsewhere, but not from its own military production. In Germany, military production accounts currently for roughly 0.4% of GDP. Automotive accounts for 4 to 5% of GDP. So yes, the more money that governments will now spend in defense, the faster domestic military production can increase its capacities, production facilities, the more important military equipment production will become. But this is a slow burning story. So this will gradually increase. So what we did, for example, for our Eurozone forecasts now, we increased the Eurozone GDP growth by 0.1 percentage points this year, 0.2 percentage points next year, on the back of more defense spending. So this gives you an idea of how large the impact will currently be. So slow burner, outcome in terms of what is really how will the war end, I have no clue. I think to sum up, and that's also important, because I have the reputation of being a fearmonger. I think what is really good to know, we have despite all this uncertainty, and despite the potentially negative implication that Trump economic policies can have on Europe. When you look at how Europe has reacted now over the last couple of weeks, and this is Europe and this is Germany, I think the outlook has clearly improved. I think where if you compare the current situation to where we were at the start of the year, we now have a huge fiscal package coming out of Germany. We have a big intention in Europe to do more on defense spending, and of course we can always find problems with all these with these elements. But generally speaking, this is a much better position for Europe than where we were at the start of the year.
Yeah, thanks for this generous ending. I was getting concerned a bit about how awkward it feels to become optimistic because of higher military spending and because we will produce more tanks and jets, fighter jets, but it is what it is. Thank you, Carsten. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Hope next time you'll make it in person and see how big fans Romanians are of German cars, because if you look around the streets in Bucharest, it feels like the German economy is doing better here than in Germany, at least the automotive. So thank you again, and till next time.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
Yeah, so dacă sunt întrebări, if there are any questions, apologize, we didn't have this while Carsten was still on, but are there any questions on Romanian economy maybe? Actually, maybe I do a very brief sum up of our forecast for this year. So we're coming from a 0.9% GDP growth last year. We see it going to 1.6 this year. Again, not overwhelming, but it's still growth. It's still above Eurozone average. We see the inflation averaging 5% this year. Risks are a bit to the upside. We see the exchange rate closing the year at 5.05 from the current 4.98. Risks are for the exchange rate to stay where it is, but I have a somewhat higher degree of confidence that this year we will finally exceed this 5 level for the euro-leu. We see the interest rates marginally lower. The central bank, I think, will cut rate this year by 0.5, so 2 cuts of 25 basis points. In the second part of the year, this will bring, let's say, Robor rates from the current 5.9 to around 5.5, more or less, if our forecast is right. Risks here are for less rate cuts than this. So definitely for rates to stay on hold, this seems to be the direction of travel. Yeah, so I would close here, and thanks for your attention.